Software documentation is one of the important factors that might affect software project success. During a software development lifetime cycle, team members generate and use different types of documents. These documents can be either printed or online, and there are different types of documents can be used during this lifetime. So for any phase or during any phase of the development lifetime cycle, there must be a document, or there will be type of documents such as software requirement specification, architectural design document, testing cases, users manuals, and help systems. As we mentioned earlier, software teams during software development lifetime cycle, they use different types of documents. So the development for any software starts with an idea, which is the user requirement or the purpose for the software. Then we'll move to the first phase of the development lifetime cycle, which is the software requirement specification. During this phase, we generate functional requirement, non-functional requirement, domain requirement, and system requirement. All these requirements will be included in one single document. We call it SRS document, which is the software requirement specification document. So the first type of document we generated during the lifetime cycle is this SRS document. The SRS document will be like the input for the next phase, which is the development. So, and during the development, we design and implement the software. This kind of documents will be the input for this phase. So designers, in order to design their software, they need to know or to have a full description for the requirement for the software. During this phase, we create UML diagrams, use cases, class diagrams, sequence diagrams, and different types of diagrams. And during the implementation, we usually document our code using what we call code comments within the code. The output for the design document or development document will be what we call an architectural design document. So this will be the second type of document we deal with it. So this is 1, 2. So now we know 2 types of documents we generated during the design development. This type of document, which is the architectural design document, will be the input for the next phase, which is the testing. Okay, so we need it, so we need to understand the architectural for our software, or in order to be able to test it. What kind of document we create here? With this, during this phase, we use test cases, which is like a description to what type of testing what we are going to create or do. So the third type is like the test cases. Now we'll move to the next, to the real world, and the software will be delivered to the user. At this time of the development, we will try to create some kind of document that's needed by the customer. So at this phase, documents are needed by the users in order to be able to understand the software. And this type of document can be either tutorials, references, procedures, manuals that will be created to be to make software easy to use and useful for the main user or the target user. Course objectives. In this course, we aim to prepare the student and to provide them with a skill that will help them to write their own documentation. So basically, we are going to help them to find the practical steps that will help them to start and complete their documentation project successfully باختصار will help them or give them the guidelines اللي راح تساعدهم على انهم يقدروا يكملوا اي documentation project that will help make a software easy to use and useful. The second thing, we are going to help them to explore the ideas behind the software documentation. And here, when we say ideas, we mean that a software documentation as a discipline and as a profession. Organization of the course. The course material is divided into 3 parts. Part 1, the forms of software documentation. This part introduces the concepts of task orientation and the different forms of software documentation, such as tutorials, procedures, and references. This will cover the first 4 chapters of the assigned textbook. Part 2. This part describes the task-oriented software documentation process, including planning, user analysis, writing, reviewing, and testing phases. So it basically will cover the lifetime cycle for any documentation process, starting with the planning phase and ending with the testing phase. Part 2 covers the chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8 of our textbook. Part 3, this part represents the idea behind software architecture documentation process, and also it gives example of real software product architecture documents. Software documentation. By the end of this course, we'll be able to answer a set of questions. First question, what's software documentation? In general, software documentation is a form of writing. It's kind of document that, represent a phase or a stage in the development for the software. Why we need software documentation? What's the purpose of software documentation? Who uses or who benefits from software documentation? The fourth question, how we develop software documentation? Is there a specific process? Is there a specific guidelines we need to follow in order to develop like the software document? When we develop software documentation, is there a specific time during the software development lifetime cycle? Do we have to wait till we finish the software, or we can start during the development for the software writing the document? And finally, where do we start? What's the beginning or what's the start point? The first chapter of our textbook is understanding what we call task orientation. Before I define what we mean by task orientation, this chapter will give us a set of guidelines and steps that any documentation writer need to follow in order to develop a successful manual or help system. And this manual and help system will be different types. What's task orientation? Task orientation document, a document that focuses on the user's specific task. So basically here, the main focus will be to define a document that basically focuses on the task that a specific users follows or needs in their job. Chapter 1, understanding task orientation, as we mentioned. This chapter aims to help the software documentation writers achieve 2 goals. First goal, which is encourage the users to learn the program, and we call this proficiency. In general, to make the program easy to use by the target user. Second goal, which is encourage the users to apply the program to problem in their workplace, which is the efficiency. This means to make program usable and allow the user to apply it in order to finish their tasks. this, if you look at this, that means it's not enough to make the user learn the program and what kind of tasks the program, what kinds of tasks the program will offer for the user, which is the proficiency. Also, we need to be able to allow the user to apply everything they learned in their workplace, which is the efficiency. So they will be efficient and professional in their work. So always we focus on one principle, which is we want to make the software easy to use and usable. Here in this slide, we will try to define what we mean by software documentation. There are many definitions found for software documentation. So software documentation can be defined as, first, a form of writing for both print and online media that supports the efficient and effective use of software in its intended environment. So basically, it's any kind of document you provide for your user so you can make them efficient in their software and effective in their environment. Second, also it can be defined as a written text or illustration that combines software or computer software. It either explains how it operates or how it uses it, and may mean different things to people in different tools. So basically, it's a written text, an illustration, a kind of presentation for the software. It can show us how we can use the software, how we can operate it, and so on. Now, what do we mean by task orientation? What's the right definition for task orientation? First, we have to ask ourselves, what is task-oriented documentation? Task-oriented documentation is really the challenge of creating documentation that looks at the process of writing and finds way to learn about user. So task-oriented documentation consists of manuals and help systems that reflects a real user and human forms. The process of task-oriented documentation requires that you analyze the user in his or her work environment to discover the activities within the software program and where the manual fits. So it's an approach to software documentation that presents information in chronological order based on the user workplace. بالخلاصة حتى نقدر ان نوصل للتاسك oriented document, we have to study the user, we have to analyze the user in their workplace حتى نقدر نعرف ايش طبيعة التاسكس اللي بيحتاجها اليوزرز حتى يقدر يتلائم او يتأقلم to fit in their workplace or be professional in their work. So again, it's a design strategy. So when we follow task-oriented process, we try to design a software document. So we try to attempt to increase the user knowledge of the application program by integrating the software with the user work act environment. Here بالsecond definition احنا بنوضح انه التاسك اورينتد او التاسك اورينتيشن بروسيس هي عباره عن ديزاين استراتيجي. احنا بنستخدمها حتى نقدر نساعد او نعمل انكريز للنولج اللي بياخذها اليوزر من استخدام البروجرام حتى يقدر ايش يطبقها بالانفايرمنت تبعته and benefit in it in their environment. Based on the previous definitions, we can conclude that any software documentation that shows the connection between the user's workplace and the program can be described as task-oriented document. Also, any task-oriented manual should adapt the software to the user job rather than making the user adapt to the software itself. Here, what we say, when we design a task-oriented document, التاسك-oriented document بيخلي اليوزر أو بيخلي السوفتوير تلائم مع احتياجات اليوزر وليس العكس بأنه you have to teach the user what they need from the software. You don't have to teach the user the whole software in order to use it. So it focuses on the user task, not the program features. What we call, we don't have to teach the user all the features in the software. We have to teach them just only what help them to be professional in their workplace. In order to be able to use this, we have to use many elements. These elements, many elements can be used in order to be able to design a task-oriented. Examples and scenarios can contribute to this and help in designing such kind of document or task-oriented. In general, task orientation encourages the successful application of software to workplace objectives. It basically focuses on helping the software users clearly see the relationship between the program and their workplace. So in general, like users, they don't know what's the benefit from using the software in their workplace. Task-oriented documents help them to see what's the benefit and what's the relation between any task you perform in your environment and the program feature. This approach to documentation is shown in variety of print and online forms. We will discuss in this course three types of documents: tutorials, procedures, and references, and we'll try to compare them and give the major differences and features for each one of these. Here in this slide, we will offer like an example of a task-oriented document. This figure shows a task-oriented manual. We call it the Getting Started document for a software called PV Wave. As we mentioned earlier, there are many elements that need to be available in any task-oriented document in order to be successful or in order to be described as a task-oriented document. These elements, such as the introduction, which is emphasize discovery and problem solving. So when we read this kind of thing or the introduction, we will see what kind of problem that this kind of manual will help us to solve or will help us to learn. The second thing is, like, for example, the figures. If you see these kind of figures, these example are balanced figures or images will help us to see the differences between the original like input for this software and what kind of output we will see. Third thing, cartoon-like or humanized, like characters. These also are an example that like help us to like produce encouragement for the users in order to learn. Also, we have, so these are the cartoon humanized. Also, we have the scenarios or the stories. In this section, we try here in this section, we try to provide or we try to represent the tutorial as a story or as a scenario. Also, we can include examples, and there are other different types of like of elements that might help us to create a task-oriented document like. Following our set of strategies that encourage and support the task orientation design of your documentation project. Those are 9 strategies. These 9 strategies, each one can be considered as a feature or an element that need to be available in any document in order to be task-oriented document. If we look at them, the first one of them is emphasizing problem solving. If we go to the previous figure, we said in order to emphasize the problem solving, we can use, for example, the introduction, which is the introduction, for example, is an example where you can show the problem solving. Second thing is provide task orientation, so task-oriented organization. Any document, in order to be considered as a task-oriented document, need to follow a specific organization or specific structure. Encourage user control of information. Think about this, or think about scenarios. If you go back to the scenarios, you can think about this, that these kind of scenarios give the user the feeling that they control the use of information. Orient pages semantically. Any task-oriented document need to include both routine and complex tasks designed for the users, and this is the main focus of the task-oriented document. We design for a specific user. We design a document that includes or that focuses on a specific task for the user. Facilitate communication tasks, and we'll talk about this later. Encourage user communities and how user they depend on their partners in the committee or team members in order to finish their task. And finally, support what we call a cognitive schema or cognitive processing schema. Strategy number 1, emphasize problem solving. This strategy indicates that any manual or help system should help the users solve problems in their workplace. As an example, user problems may be kind of, how can I organize this project? Where and how can I find this specific data? How can I complete this specific task? Task-oriented documents use the introductory overview or the introduction in order to emphasize the problem-solving strategy. So we can emphasize the problem in any document using the introduction or the introductory overview. This introduction can help the user not only recognize the steps to follow, but also the goals and objectives of their software. If we go back to slide 11, we can see this in the introduction part of our tutorial. Strategy number 2, provide task-oriented organization. This means to organize the manual or a help system in a way that matches the kind of task a user will perform and follow the sequence and not in terms of alphabetically arranged menus. The first one means that we have to match the kind of task the user will perform in their environment with the task the programs offers or presents for us. The second thing, we have to follow the scenario, the user scenario that the user uses the software for, and not follow how the program features are ordered in their menu. An example of a task-oriented organization in word processing manual that follows. For example, in order to do anything, we have to open a file, type in words, save the file, exit the program. This is the right organization or right structure for the task-oriented steps. Strategy number 3, encourage the user's control of information. Users should feel, or in our nature as a user, we have to feel in control of the program. That means users must decide what the program can do for them. It should not be the other way around. Also, the document should show the user how to make key decisions. supply key information, or determine program outputs. For an example, when we use, for example, any database program, if we specify how we can search for something, that means we have a control of information because we determine what we exactly want to look for. We have the key decisions. We supply the key information for the user, for the program. So supplying what a database program will search for, that means we supply the information and indicating identifying which data the program will process. This again a way to control the user information. In the task-oriented document, we can think of this as a scenario. The scenario helps us to control or encourage the user control of information. Strategy number 4, orient pages semantically. First, what do we mean by orienting the pages semantically? It means arrange the elements of the page meaningfully according to element of the job the user need to perform. This is what we mean by orient a page semantically. So they will have meaning based on the user environment and based the user task. We follow some kind of ways in order to orient the pages semantically. And these ways or methods, for example, we might put important elements first. We might use large fonts in order to make a meaning or give a meaning for the contents. We might imply visuals and images so we can balance text in your document. So basically, in order to make a text more clear or more understandable, we can add visuals or figures that represent how like the process happens. This makes it easy for the users to understand and perform the jobs in a better way. Strategy number 5, facilitate both routine and complex tasks. As we mentioned before, any task-oriented document should include both the routine and complex tasks. Examples of routine tasks, for example, or what we mean by routine tasks. It's repeated tasks that easily represent the conventional procedure. Any task that we repeat all the time, such as, for example, save file, open file, delete record, this kind of task, we call them the routine task that we do need, that doesn't need a professional, like, experiences in order to perform. The second part of task or the second type of task are the complex tasks. Complex tasks are these tasks that require user knowledge that comes from experience. So in order to apply them, we need to have a knowledge of the software and experience. As a simple example, if we are using spreadsheets or the Excel program in order to calculate employee salaries and identify, for example, their performance in annual report, this might be a complex task for a beginner user or for a naive user who is not doesn't have knowledge with the information technology or IT. So if any manual helps the user to perform complex tasks, it will be valued more by the users. Strategy number 6, design for users. This strategy doesn't need to be explained because the main focus or the main purpose of the task-oriented document that we design for our users. We try to design documents that help or focus on specific users. The design of a manual or help system should be based on the user needs rather than from templates of how a manual should be arranged or should look like. So basically, when we design for the user, we don't need to have follow a specific template or a specific form. We need to follow the user needs, the user task, how they perform, their scenarios, how they perform the task in their environment. These kind of documents, we call them user-driven document manuals, and should allow, these kinds of documents should allow what? should allow an user to find what they need. It's not enough to find what you need. Also, it should allow you to understand what they find or you find. After you understand it, also it's not enough. Understanding the tasks, understanding the software features is not enough, or it doesn't have a purpose unless you apply it or understand it properly and apply it in your environment. Thus, user-driven design needs an extensive user analysis. So I will explain it more. In any kind of document, we call it the user-driven manual or document. This kind of document should allow us to find what we need, understand what we find, and apply it in our environment. In order to do that, we have to understand our user, and that's come from a good user analysis.